Welcome to Glow and Tell, a podcast about all things beauty, wellness, and business, sponsored by Artemis, the brand empowering the unsung heroes of beauty and wellness. Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of Glow and Tell. We are so excited to welcome back Simon Mansell, founder of Artemis, to the podcast today, and are really excited to be talking with him about what it takes to make an entrepreneur. Simon, thanks so much for joining us again.
Thanks for having me again.
So first, I know that last episode, we obviously talked quite a bit in depth about your background in terms of experience in business, but I would really like to ask you to kind of talk through with our listeners what your experience has been in entrepreneurship, where that passion really ignited for you, and kind of your journey as an entrepreneur thus far. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of walking us through that before we dive into the meat of the episode.
Yeah, sure. So I think you did ask me in some of the pre-work if entrepreneurs are born or made, which I thought was an interesting question. And when I did think back about this, because I was thinking about this episode, I, did remember that when I was at school, I was kind of doing business stuff, not like Richard Branson levels, but I used to run the school or our class book, as in I would take bets off people, because I sort of worked out that you could, if you calculated the odds right, you basically couldn't lose. You have to calculate the odds right, and you have to get the right number of bets, and then you can't lose. So I like that. And I was also pretty good at maths, as we call it. We call it maths instead of math in England. So I was doing math lessons for younger students, making £7.50 an hour, which obviously isn't a lot of money, but I remember my best friend was working at a petrol station and he was making £2 an hour. So it was I was making a bit more money through some skills that I had. So I suppose I was quite early in terms of starting businesses. I was also brought up in a very strict religious upbringing where I wasn't allowed to do anything, and I had to go to the equivalent of church a lot, and I was sort of very bored, and it was I was sort of trapped in this world a little bit. That's how I felt anyway. So I think also just the fact that business to me equals freedom, which is kind of one of the messages that I say to people. It's it's not easy or low stress for sure, but it means that you are in control of your own destiny. No one is telling you what to do. So I think there was some natural aptitude, and also I had this upbringing thing which made me want to be more free. So that's, I think, the reasons why.
Yeah, 100%.
And then in terms of my actual journey, I suppose I worked after leaving home for about 5 years in sales. Fortunately, I was just good at it. I didn't ever think I was going to be a salesperson because I sort of left home a little bit before I was planning to. But I started a business when I was 22 in the advertising world, and didn't know anything about running an advertising agency, but it was when digital media was pretty new. So I was able to be in a new industry where the most experienced people knew 5 years of stuff and I knew 0 years, but it still meant I wasn't that far behind, and had a lot of ups and downs with that business, so grew it fast, go down, I'd have to let people go, grew it again. And ended up selling the business after 13 years for $19 million to a software as a service company. Worked there for 2.5 years, actually sort of built a division within that business, which was fairly successful, partly because they had a lot of great clients for me to cross-sell to. And then after that, opened a retail store in New York called Cryofuel, which was a beauty wellness retail location. That business did okay. Retail is a really hard business, and I wouldn't say that I was particularly good at that. I wasn't the main person running it, but was definitely involved in the strategy, etc. But by having that retail store, and then going on a vacation with my wife, I found a device that performed really well for some different indications, and then brought it into that store, and it really generated a lot of revenue. And on the back of that, launched Artemis, which was a distribution company for selling these devices to beauty centers and med spas, etc., across the US. And that's kind of how Artemis got started. So I suppose it's just kind of a journey that I've been through of starting different things, saying yes to things, trying things, some of them working out, some of them not working out. Definitely some natural aptitude from being younger, but also just a will to be a want to be free, I suppose. That's how I see running businesses.
Yeah, and just knowing you personally and knowing your sort of personal mission and dedication to making entrepreneurship more accessible to more people, what is it that's really driving that passion for you? Is it this same passion of wanting others to have freedom in that same way? What is it that's kind of driving your desire to kind of create these communities of entrepreneurs?
Um, well, I think there's a couple of things. I think, just logically, when I think about employment, if I'm paying you $50,000 to do a job, then I'm probably making a lot more than 50,000 on the work that you're doing. So I'm paying you 50,000 and I'm making 200,000, right? If I'm the
Mm.
employer. So that just logically doesn't make sense to me in the long term. Now, it does make sense when you're young because you want to learn, you want to be around other smart people, you want to have a community. So I'm not saying don't ever get a job, but I think for the long term, that doesn't just logically make a lot of sense to me. Like you can make more money doing the same work if you do it for yourself. So that's number one. And number two, there's always BS within companies. Somebody says something to somebody and then somebody thinks differently of you because of that. And it's like, but that, just this kind of political stuff. And I think it's partly because I was just never good at that political stuff. I was never good at like saying the right thing to the right person or like managing how people thought about me. Um, I think business is just, you're free. The customer is still holding you to account. So it's not like you don't have a boss. You still have a boss. It's the customer, but
Mm.
it's like a less annoying boss because the customer really doesn't have a personal opinion of you. They are, is this a good product? And is this
Mhm.
a good price for the product?
Right.
And what's the competition and all that sort of stuff. It's like, I don't know, I prefer that type of boss who's very like the customer is almost the ultimate task orientated boss. And I had some of those in, the times I have been employed. But a lot of bosses, there's a lot of other emotional stuff, ego and stuff going on, which you have to sort of manage. And I felt like I just didn't enjoy that. So I feel like number one, it just logically makes sense once you have the skills to make the money yourself instead of giving them to the boss, which is effectively a middleman. And two, I prefer the customer being my boss than some person because I find the customer less annoying.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, would you say that the less annoying piece, does that come from just this desire to have logic be the driving force? You mentioned emotionality and kind of these politics coming into play when you're in a business and working for someone else. Is it that the customer is operating with this kind of cost reward analysis, or at least what you perceive to be this cost reward analysis that lends more logic to the work? Is that what you're saying in that sense?
Yeah, I think I kind of have this like quite deep thing about anything that I regard as stupid, which I think is actually like, um, my when I was growing up, my mum often used to say that my brother was cleverer than me, and I think that I always remember that for some reason. She was not meaning it meanly or whatever; she was just trying to motivate me. But I suppose I now project my own insecurity about stupidity on decisions and other people. So what I
Mm,
mean by that is like if I don't think something makes sense, I really push against it. And a lot of the time, when you've got decisions being made by groups of people,
mhm,
it's not purely based on the data or not purely based on what the customer thinks. It's based on like something that's going on in their lives or some like insecurities they have that they're projecting and all that kind of stuff. Whereas I feel like the customer is a purer source of truth. It's a bit like the
mhm,
wisdom of crowds, right? If you ask one person something, it could be rubbish. But if you ask 1,000 people for a number, like, the number of like marbles in a jar, if
mm,
you average those people out, they're usually pretty accurate.
right.
So I feel like the customers, you start to get this wisdom of crowds effect where you get like a real truth.
Mhm,
So I like that piece of it. And then, yeah, I just like the personal freedom of being able to try things, do things. I'm sort of quite quick person. So like, I want to try it. Okay, that didn't work. Change it back. And often I think when I've worked at companies, by the time I've persuaded people to do something,
mhm,
I could have tried it, worked out it was a stupid idea and changed it back already. Whereas then I might try it after persuading everyone for 6 months, and then it might still be stupid. Um, so I find that part frustrating as well.
Right, right. You have more of an ability to have this kind of creative aspect of being able to do these rapid fire ideas and be able to really execute and then quickly learn the lessons versus having to go through the channels of the red tape that comes with any business and, is sort of part of the organizational structure. So it's almost it's a beast that is a necessity in some ways, but it can be prohibitive to action, certainly. And, I think with an entrepreneur's mind and being someone who especially is so interested in the nascent phases of these businesses, of really getting into the nascent phases of industries. I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about that as an entrepreneur, because it seems like from what you've shared about your experience, from what I know about you as well, within the context of Artemis and now your new venture, you're really tapping into these industries that are very nascent, where you feel that you have, if not a leg up, at least not too far to run forward to meet the competition. So, do you have any thoughts on that you want
Yeah,
to
I suppose
share?
just to go back to your previous point a second. I do think like my type of personality is effective at the start of a company, but
Mhm.
can become a bit of a liability as the company gets bigger
Mm.
because like I just want to get stuff done. And
Mhm.
sometimes I'm not then bringing everyone else along with me. I'm sort of pushing people who are like in other departments, but like relevant, but like they're sort of they're in my way. So I'm not saying like my how I am is good at all stages in a company, but I just think
Mhm.
I have realized that it is good in that very early phase
Mhm.
because then it's like all that matters is doing the right thing for the customer. So
Right.
that's why I have, for example, with Artemis, Kate has come in and is the CEO of the business and is running the business in a much more, I think, professional way than I would. So it's partly just being aware of where you're good and where you're not good, and then
Mhm.
bringing in other people to like balance out those skills. And so that's, I think that just to go back on the previous point. Yeah, so to answer your next point, I do really like working on new things. I don't know if that, like I don't care about money, but I sort of use it as like a measure of success. And I think I
Mhm.
probably would be richer if I just picked an industry and stayed in it. Because,
Mm.
in advertising, for example, I had a big network. Anyone I was ever going to hire, I could always reference check them with people that they didn't know. They knew, but they didn't know I was reference checking them with somebody because I just knew a lot of people. And because I've switched industry so much, I think that has been a disadvantage financially. But I just sort of don't care as much about that because I enjoy more the challenge of like figuring out these new things. And I like to find what I like to do is I like to find stuff that has what I would describe as early product market fit. So it's like somebody's been working on it a long time. It's a cool idea. It hasn't taken off yet, but it's just at the bottom of that S curve, So like I started working with Facebook when they had 30 million users. I never knew it would be as big as it ended up being, but that was a sort of example. I had also started working with Google very early on. We were the first advertiser in the UK, but didn't sort of fully take advantage of that, which is like partly why I did focus so much on Facebook in my advertising business. Um, then, the devices that I found with some help from the team, not by myself, but like I found, or like some devices we've got lined up for launch next year for Artemis, I think are really exciting new technologies that like are kind of revolutionary. And then, my new business that I've just started, which is in the field of nanofibers, is also like a very new area that no one really knows what it is, but these guys have been working on it for 15 years. They've patented this, method just over a year, about under a year ago. So, I really like finding these new things, these new technologies, and also the people who are doing that stuff tend to be interesting. And I've just found that my skills around commercialization, which is, sales and marketing,
Mhm.
are actually a good fit for those inventor types because the inventor types tend to be, geekier. Some of them are in different countries and don't speak great English.
Mhm.
Coming to America and selling and marketing is like terrifying for them. So I have tried to develop my own products in the past with very and failed quite badly a couple of times. So now I realize I should focus on early stage companies and focus on commercializing inventions that are already great, but maybe either haven't been marketed well if someone's tried to market them already, or they're brand new and they need thought about how to bring them to market. So just sort of picking that specialist area. But yeah, I do have a passion for, especially like I think I was always interested in science at school. Like the science behind how these things are working, how they're improving, in our case, skin and body treatments. It's a combination of, chemistry and biology and stuff. So it's really interesting getting into them. I don't always understand everything about the science and the biology behind some of this stuff, but I try my best, and we have some other good experts now to advise us. So I do find, just finding new stuff interesting. And that's why, I get a lot of people who message me because of Artemis who want to sell to our, 2,000 customers. And most of the stuff that I look at, I don't end up liking or thinking is good or innovative, but, occasionally you come across some really interesting stuff.
Yeah, and how would you say that you've identified or been able to identify these industries or sort of niches within industries that are at that S curve that are just about to take off? What would you say your discovery process looks like, or do you feel that there's been an element of luck that's come into that for you as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I started saying I had a discovery process, that would just be a complete lie.
That's honest.
It's just like random people turn up and say, "Do you want to look at this? Do you want to look at this?" And I just always say yes. Like people
That's
people often, my friends say to me, like, why are you on that call? Why are you doing that? And like, yeah, because 90% of the time it is a complete waste of time. But it's just the 10% of the time it's not. And sometimes I've been to a waste of time thing, and then a few months later, that person's come back to me with something that wasn't a waste of time. So I
right.
think just generally saying yes and putting yourself out there, putting yourself in different situations, traveling to different countries, going to trade shows, like just say yes to going and doing stuff, especially I think in person in this, post COVID age, like get out of your bedroom or basement and go out and like meet some people and talk to some people. Like, often you maybe meet 20 people and 19 of them are a waste of time, but you'll meet probably one person who tells you something interesting, has got something interesting. So I think just saying yes. In terms of Artemis specifically, I have been working more on R&D, and obviously, as I said, we've got this like exciting product lineup coming up. I did have a framework, so I decided to focus more on body, although we do have some like face products now as well. And I sort of, from consumer research, which is a lot like my wife and her friends, because they're kind of our target audience, separated the main issues that those women would have into, fat loss, cellulite, stretch marks, skin tightening, and muscle. So I sort of had this framework in my mind where if someone comes to me with a device, for example, in Artemis's case, it's like, does it fit into my framework? And if it doesn't fit into my framework, it's not like a no, I'm still interested. But if it fits into my framework, then I know, okay, Artemis has a device in that category already. So do we
Right.
want another device in that category? Because then we're sort of competing against ourselves. Or, ideally, I want to find the 5 best devices in those body categories. So I think, yeah, sometimes I do end up with some sort of framework, but a lot of it is just saying yes, I suppose luck. I suppose though, it's like saying, is a salesperson lucky if they make a lot of phone calls? I mean, you'd probably say no.
Right.
But yeah, it's not like, I'm not a visionary. Like I've worked with visionaries before where they can see the future. I cannot see the future, but I can see something where that is interesting. That's already almost like it's almost started, but it's early.
You have the ability to see the opportunity, not necessarily see the future. So you are able to come in and see the opportunity in something that hasn't lifted quite yet. And I think that you also have the skill to see how to know how to lift it, which I
Yeah.
think is, to your point, that's the blind spot that you're coming in to fill in some of these innovators or creators or inventors' lives, where they know that they have the vision, they have the product or the service, they just don't know how to lift it, they don't know how to take that off. And that's sort of where you come in within the context of entrepreneurship. So, sort of switching gears here a little bit, I wanted to ask you, because I know that we definitely have a lot of listeners who are either entrepreneurs already or are professionals that might be interested in entrepreneurship in some capacity. What would you say would be your advice to someone who is currently a professional, so not an entrepreneur, has not yet started their own business, but is really thinking about starting their own business, thinking about entrepreneurship as a path for them? What would you give them in terms of advice of how to get even started? Where should they start? What should they be doing? How should they be thinking? I think especially at this this day and age, we sometimes get the advice to just jump off the cliff. And sometimes, that's not necessarily the right advice. We need to make sure we're financially secure. We have, enough stability to take care of ourselves, to be able to lift our businesses. So I wanted to get your feedback on that as someone who's, opened many businesses and had a lot of success.
Yeah, well, the first thing is it depends on the person. So
Mm-hmm.
if anyone's listening to this and they want to talk to me, I will talk to you. You can contact me and I will talk to you personally about whatever it is. But so, the first thing I do is ask them some questions.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'll say, what are you doing now? How long have you been doing that? Do you love it? What's that market like? What are your skills? It's also understanding their personality. Some people are very action orientated. Other people are perfectionists. Like, what is the right character type for a business? If you're going to be a solo entrepreneur, do you need a business partner? Because, some of your traits need balancing out. So do you have capital, or access to capital? So the first thing I would do is ask them a load of questions. So if I was to say, the most common people who ask me for advice are people who are a bit younger, I would say. So probably in their early 20s are the most common people who ask me for advice. So if we say it was somebody in that kind of age range, maybe whose work is working at I suppose maybe an Artemis client who's working somewhere and thinking of setting up their own location, then I would be like, obviously in that business, you need some capital, right? Because you need to create the store, you need to buy the devices, you need to have some money for marketing. So if they haven't got some money, then I would, suggest that they save some money. It's also their personal situation, so do they have a partner, for example, who's earning a bit where they could take a year of risk and the partner can still pay the bills and look after the kids if you've got kids and all that kind of stuff. So, understanding a little bit about that. And then I suppose just going through the skills that you need to set up the business that you're thinking of setting up. The first thing I normally do is talk about the specific business and is that actually a good business? Because Warren Buffett has this thing where if you're in a leaky boat, which he means by a bad business, don't fix the boat, get in another boat. So what he's saying there is good businesses actually can be run by less good operators. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you're in a tricky business where the business model is hard or there's a lot of competition, even if you are a good operator, it's going to be harder. So it's best to always start in a good boat in that, if we relate it to that analogy. So first thing I do is I ask them about their specific business idea, talk about the skills experience they've got. Maybe they're missing some skills, maybe in finance or if sales would be necessary. Then it's like, do they have the capital to do it? Can they take the risk in terms of their personal situation? Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about their personality, like how they deal with stress, perfectionist, for example, like how would you make sure that you ship? Because you have to get stuff out if you're doing a business. So, talking through some of those things. And then often there's a skill gap and it might be, okay, well, spend a bit more time working for somebody who's really good at where you're missing your skills. I often tell people in their early 20s to focus on learning. Don't worry about optimizing for money. Just find the place where you're going to learn the most. And generally that's because you've got a great boss. So focus on who you're going to be working for. What is the work you're going to be doing? How much interaction are you going to have with them? It's kind of like this mentorship phase of becoming good at anything. I do encourage people to take the leap fairly early, as long as they've been a bit thoughtful about it. Because I think the actual experience of running a business is I feel like my MBA was running my business from when I was 22. I made so many mistakes and did so many things, but I was doing it for myself. There was no choice. I'd jumped in the sea and I had to swim. So yeah, it's building skills, making sure you have capital, thinking about your mental situation, thinking about your family situation, and then taking the jump, at the right time, not too early when you're just not ready or you don't have the money or whatever. The other thing I suggest to people sometimes is to start a services business first, because a services business doesn't need any capital. Mm-hmm. You can be a advertising agency or, a coach for people who are trying to, grow their med spa, those types of businesses where you can set them up without any money and get sort of rolling and then bring in people. That can be a nice business to get started with. They tend to cash flow fairly quickly. They don't have a lot of capital risk. you can go on platforms like Upwork and places like that and pick up jobs, so that's one option as well, to like do this halfway house. Or the other advice I sometimes give people who are in secure jobs, like I've got a friend who very well paid, but doesn't always need to work super hard because he's just been at the company for a long time and he's extremely successful there. So I said to him, well, take the 1.5 days you could spare and do the side hustle, get it going and see if it works before you jump ship.
Right.
That's another kind of option. But yeah, I mean, it really does depend on the person, because obviously everyone's situation, skills, capital, risk, mental health are all different.
Right, 100%. And would you say that there is a particular point or moment where that leap is, where you're ready, or do you just you just have to take it before you're ever going to be ready?
It's a good question. I mean, I suppose like when you have I think if my wife hadn't got pregnant with our daughter, I don't know if we'd have ended up with 4 kids. But I think I would have always ended up running my own business. So I think it does depend on your personality a bit. Like, whereas other people, obviously, they desperately want to have kids, and that's the main objective of their life, So it's like, I think it just depends on your personality, what's more important to you. I would say for most people to take the jump slightly early, but to make sure that you do have the skills in the business that you're going to be operating in, or like at least some of the skills. You probably need to know. You need to know how to create a product. You need to know how to sell the product, market the product, and you need to know like sort of finance, operations, delivery.
Right.
So think about how many of those things do you know. Like if you don't know any of them, then don't start.
Right.
Especially if you have no money to risk, or the type of business you're in is going to need some money. But I would generally advise people to do it slightly earlier than you think, especially as like once you have a family and kids, it's very difficult. I think there's this Nassim Taleb quote, which is like the 3 most addictive things in the world are heroin, carbohydrates, and a monthly salary. Because like once you have that nice monthly salary, then you're like, well, I get paid over there quite nicely. And then before you know it, you're older and you're never going to do it. So if you do have the itch to start a business, I would say to do it younger. But then I'm also biased by my own experiences, right? I started a business when I was young.
Sure.
I was lucky that it worked out. I also, though, think back to when I started it, and I always thought about the downside first. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, downside here is I have to move back in with my mom. That was like my worst case scenario. So it wasn't that bad. So I think about what is the downside if this doesn't work out. And also, a good thing to do is to find a way to test it.
Yes.
Like when I was starting Artemis, I was doing everything myself. I was selling the machine, I was packing the boxes. When we had a broken machine, I would drive there and like give them a new one or whatever it was. Same with this, nanofibers business I'm starting now. There's one employee, it's me. So, if it goes wrong, my risk is fairly low. And then if I see something working, then I'll scale into it. So you have to always think about how can you start something with the minimum downside possible. Because if you do that, even if you have to do that a few times in a business, businesses have almost unlimited upside. Jeff Bezos started at 0, right? So you have unlimited upside. If you protect your downside to not too bad, you could try 5 times in a row and it's still a good bet, right? Because if you lose a little bit 4 times and then the 5th time you're Jeff Bezos, you're good.
You're doing pretty good for yourself at that point. Yeah, so I think the key is, and I totally agree with you here, the key is always to jump before you think you're ready, but making sure that you also have the self-awareness, that level of humility to have built in for, I'm ready. I know that's a little bit paradoxical because I said you're never going to feel like you're ready, but it's taking the jump before you think that you're ready, but also having bedded in the structure so that you are preparing yourself to be successful. You have the container to hold that success. You have the financial security that you need to be able to hold that success. You're never going to feel fully ready to take that leap out of the comfort of the monthly salary. It's never going to feel great to take that jump, I don't think. For some people like you, potentially, it's all you've ever wanted. So it's a little bit more natural for you. But I do think that that's a really great piece of advice for people that might be just kind of on the fence and feeling like they do want that freedom that comes with being an entrepreneur. They do want to contribute to the world in that way, but they are just not sure where to get started. So I think
Yeah, I think on that point, I met this guy yesterday who we're one of the manufacturers we're hopefully going to be working with next year for Artemis. And he was running a very successful manufacturer previously. He's an extremely successful guy. And he was telling me that they're a UK-based company and they tried to launch in the US twice, spent, I think, $10 million trying to launch a sales team in the US, failed twice really badly. And I was thinking to myself as he was saying that, if I knew that when I started Artemis, I would have probably been scared. So I think there is a certain value in knowing a little bit less. Like, I didn't know him before. And I was like, well, I can sell a few machines. Like, why not?
Right.
Because I'm an idiot, right? So it's like, I don't know what's going on. So it's like, I think there's some value in like not knowing, because once you know all the things that can go wrong, it's almost more scary. That's why I think maybe starting a little bit earlier when you have the skills, but maybe you don't know all the things that can go wrong.
Right. You haven't gone down the rabbit hole of the intricacies. But I do also think, to your point earlier, that thought exercise of, going through the kind of so what, right? So if this happens, okay, so what? I move in with my mom. Obviously that's worst case scenario, but so what? That's what happens. And then I get back on my feet. And then obviously the so what is going to look different for everyone, just depending on their personal situations, as you've said. But, going through that exercise of just asking yourself, okay, so what? Okay, so what? Okay, so what? And you can just get down to the very root of it. And then that takes away some of the charge of this fear that inhibits us from taking action in the direction that we really want to go. So I think that that's a really important thing to highlight as well, is that doing that experiment, but not to a point where, you're inhibiting yourself from really being able to be open. And I think also, I think it's so important to really understand the industry you're getting into, and obviously have that level of context there. But to your point, you want to also come into it with fresh eyes. And I think that when you came in with Artemis, you really came into it with fresh eyes from a completely different industry. You gathered that baseline amount of information on the competitive landscape and what we were up against. But all in all, you came into it with a fresh perspective, which I think is, again, part of the reason why Artemis has been able to generate the success that it has, because you came into it from a different angle, and not, sort of thinking through these potential issues that other, distributors might have had. So that's definitely something that I think is important for any entrepreneur as well. So going back on this point around entrepreneurs and whether they are built or whether they are born, what would you say, in your opinion, in your estimation, are the key traits for successful entrepreneurship that you've seen and observed over those that you've mentored and even just experienced yourself?
So I'd say, to start a business, you need to have a product. You need to have a way to distribute or sell the product. And then you need to build a brand, which is about like how the company operates and delivers on its promises. So I suppose if you start at those three levels, like, can you define or find good products? If you can't do that, you've got a problem, because then you've got nothing to sell. Can you either sell or market a product? Sales for B2B companies, sales is more important. For B2C companies, marketing is probably more important. So do you have the skills in either sales or marketing, or, ideally both? And then in terms of the brand, I mean more like how people will think of your company in 5-10 years time, which is generally about delivering on your promises. Can you deliver the promises or hire the people who will deliver the promises? So like, if you think about it from what you need to start a business, I would say they're the factors. I think just the number one thing for me in terms of like personality or whatever, traits, is just like response to adversity. Like, you are going to have a lot of problems. People are going to try and like screw you over in different ways. Like, customers are going to be unhappy, staff are going to be unhappy, things are going to go wrong. Someone, if you're in America, someone's going to sue you. Like, that's just like what's going to happen. So I think, do you have a history of having something go wrong, having a small amount of time to process that, which is fine. You can be a bit depressed and have a few drinks, and then bouncing back from that adversity and doing something which is going to help fix it or move the business forward in a different way or recover. So I'd say, yeah, the skills are product, distribution, brand, which is like delivering on brand promise. And then the personality trait, which I think is most important, is response to adversity. So you have to sort of be honest with yourself about the skills and that personality side. I think also you could probably, I've had people say about me, I have a bias to action. So if it's like, should I make this a bit more perfect or should I ship it? I ship it. And I think in early startup businesses, that is a good trait. You want to be like done, not perfect. Like, obviously you don't want to be putting out shoddy work, but you want to ship stuff, find out, get feedback, improve. Like, that's especially important in the early days. So I would say maybe if other people were asked about me, they would have some negative things, but the positive thing would be, I think, probably bias to action.
Yeah, 100%. And what would you say are your sort of top 3 lessons, things that you wish that you knew before you started your first business that could have helped you to potentially avoid some of that adversity that you were talking about? Although, of course, adversity is something that's really important.
Yeah, so I think again, this is personal to me and everyone's different. But I was a little bit kind of naturally arrogant when I was younger. I don't really know why, to be honest. But so I think having a little bit more humility would have been good and stopped me from making mistakes. I generally do find that the periods in my life where I suddenly thought I was awesome was just before I would make some major mistake. So I just think that, pride does come before a fall, and just to have an awareness that you don't know everything about anything, and to have that like dose of you want to have confidence in yourself, but you also want to have that dose of humility. And if I'd had a little bit more of that, I think I would have made less business errors. So I think that was one thing. I think I didn't have a good understanding of what's called product market fit when I was younger, which is that the market wants certain products. And sometimes when you start selling something, it just starts selling. And other times it doesn't. And a lot of the time, that's not your fault. You can't force the market to want what you want it to want. And you should try your best to tweak your product to get that product market fit. Is the price right? Are the features right? Like, do you have the right thing? But if you don't find it, change product, like, because it's a bit like being in love. When you have product market fit, you really know it. Like, it's like you can't handle the amount of people who want to buy it. That's the feeling. Like, it's a great feeling. And actually, that's one of the main feelings that I search for, because I really enjoy that feeling of like, oh my God, I don't even know I'm going to do this. Right.
Right.
So I think just a bit more awareness that it's not about you forcing your mission on the market. It's about finding what the market wants and filling that need. And if you don't feel this like, oh wow, they really want my stuff, and you've tweaked it enough, then try something else. And I think sometimes I would persist a bit too long trying to force the market to want what I was selling. And then I think the third thing, which I think done a reasonable job of, but maybe could have done better, is this like concept of compound interest, which, Einstein, I think, called the eighth wonder of the world. And it applies obviously to money, right? When you invest early, you make a lot more money when you're 50, 60, 70. Most of Warren Buffett's money he made after he was 65. But I don't mean financially. I mean in terms of like relationships, industry you're in, like these time and effort you put into like dealing with people and looking for people who you want to work with for the rest of your life, I think can be really powerful. So it's just, I think, in my case, I was not a very good networker.
Mhm.
Like in terms of like putting myself out there and talking to different people. And I think I could have maybe spent a bit more time building a bit more of a network, which I now actually do more of. But I had this kind of insecurity, I think, when I was younger, where I didn't think I had anything that interesting to say.
Mhm.
So I didn't sort of put myself out there enough. And, I think the basic math of it is if you know 1,000 people and each of them has one interesting thing every 10 years, like that happens to them. If you know 1,000 people, you're going to have a lot more opportunities every year if they
Right.
tell you about it than if you know 10 people. So it's just, there is like some numbers game around networking and finding the right people, and then sort of compounding the relationships that you really enjoy and get value from. So sort of just compound interest in terms of like people, obviously financially, and also in terms of staying in the same market sector. I don't regret switching sectors because I found it more
Mhm.
interesting, but I do think if you stay in the same market sector, you can compound skills there as well. So I suppose,
Mhm.
a deeper understanding of compound interest would have been good.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love your conceptualization of compound interest within the context of building on relationships, because I think it's not really a way we often hear that conceptualized. And I do think that, kind of to your point, I think that a lot of young people and even, people of all ages can struggle with this feeling of not knowing whether they have something that is useful to say or interesting, and that they could suffer potentially with that social anxiety. And in that situation, something that I heard from a mentor that I find really really great, and something that I think kind of also ties back to you just saying yes more, just saying yes to everything, saying yes to these opportunities to engage with people, to talk with people. And something that I've really leveraged as a tool is the most interesting person in the room is always the most interested person in the room, is this quote, right? So, this ability to ask people questions and to be genuinely engaged and genuinely present with what they have to say, genuinely interested in what they have to say, that's how you start to build these connection points, and how you start to bring people out of their shell as well, and then they are so much more interested in being around you. So I think that that is a really kind of great piece of advice, and great kind of mantra that I've also kept in mind is, if you think that you're not interesting, then ask a lot of questions, and all of a sudden you're starting conversations. So I think that's a
Yeah, I think that's
really
good
great point as
advice.
well.
Definitely.
And then in terms of being, we've talked a lot about new entrepreneurs, how to break into entrepreneurship, obviously making an entrepreneur, what these traits are, but as an established entrepreneur, as a successful entrepreneur, as someone who is, working on many different ventures at the same time, how do you balance it all? How do you manage your time? How do you manage it with your family? How do you manage your life when you are somebody who is really invested and passionate in these businesses that you have created?
Well, first off, I generally focus on one thing at a time.
Mhm.
I am actually doing some R&D work for Artemis, but not too much. And most of my time I'm spending on my new business now. So I was doing more work on multiple things for a while because I was sort of researching what was the next thing I was going to do. But once I found something that I'm really interested in, I'm like, okay, I'm going to dedicate, a year and a half to this and see if I can get it to take off. So I do tend to, from a macro point of view, focus on one thing once I've identified the one thing that I think can be big. Um, I'm not always correct, but that's the first thing. Time management, I'm militant on my to-do list. So I use Asana as my sort of to-do list. So the night before, I know all the tasks I'm going to do the next day. Um, I have kind of like OCD around completing tasks. So I meditate in the morning and I do a journal where I basically usually write down my intention, which is to do my tasks for the day, complete them to my best of my ability. And then, once I've done them, feel okay. Because often if I don't do that, I feel unhappy, even when I've completed all the tasks. I think I should do more tasks because, I'm in mental like everyone else. Um, then I start work early. So normally like 6 a.m. And I'm just trying to do one thing at a time if I can. So I try not to have messaging on. I have like different levels of success around this, but I try not to have messaging on. I try and do one task at a time. I do have this like Pomodoro timer where you can like turn it over and it sets 20 minutes. So, you know, I want to try and focus on something for 20 minutes. So I think that the key to productivity in general is single tasking and not doing multiple things at the same time. I tend to go, so I do 20 minutes, 30 minutes of deep work. I go and make myself a cup of tea, you know, like I have a little break, and try and get a little bit of, you know, sunshine and all that kind of stuff, like Andrew Huberman says, you know, so, so it's just being focused from a macro level, starting early, having my like boot up meditation journaling sequence, having my to-do list organized. I also step back from my to-do list and go, is this things that I should be doing? Is this things only I can do? Should I be delegating any of these tasks? Then once I get into my to-do list, trying to do one task at a time to the best that I can. You know, I'm just trying to, what I say to myself in my head is like, every day I'm trying to move the ball down the field. So even if I go from the 0 yard line to the 3 yard line, I've moved the ball. So, you know, that's also like to control my own like mental health, I suppose. So I'm not going to complete everything. I'm not going to have the business launch. There's a lot to do, right? So I'm just moving the ball down the field. And then, team members. So, you know, my new business, for example, I have 9 people working on the business, but they're all contractors. So they're not employees. And so it's just like, are they doing good work? Are they working well together? And then, you know, being direct with feedback to them and like saying to them, okay, if this doesn't improve, I'm going to switch, you know, not anything personal. It's just like the quality or the timing or whatever hasn't been there, you know. So being sure that I have the right team members who are like talented and, you know, who I enjoy working with. You know, this coach that I think Mike Pegg, who we've I think both talked to, has this expression which is like pot drillers or pot fillers, like people who sap your energy when you talk to them, or people who you feel better after you've talked to them. And I try and have more pot fillers or all pot fillers if I can, because it's just so much more fun to work with a pot filler on stuff, you know, who are like positive and like helping you move forward. So that was a lot of like talking there, but hopefully that made some sense.
It did. It did. So you're talking about how you've kind of identified this way of working for you that really works for you, where you have this ritual around meditation and journaling, setting intention, waking up early, you know, the Pomodoro technique you had mentioned around time management. How was it that you identified your unique way of working? You know, I know that everyone has their own energy system. Some people work in big bursts of energy and then need to take a week out. Some people are able to work consistently 9 to 5, no problem. How was it that you really came to that? Was it through trial and error? Was it just through getting to know yourself a little bit better? Because I think it is just so important that people learn their working style and how best to really leverage that.
Yeah, it's a really great question, actually. So I do remember specifically because I was at Sprinkler. So Sprinkler was the company that bought my advertising agency, TBG. And when I got there, they gave me these other divisions to run. So I ended up with 400 people working for me. Everyone wanted to talk to me because everyone wants a pay rise. You know, my days were crazy with meetings, and we were on 3 or 4 floors, and I was running up and down the stairs because I was so busy. And I think I think it was a Tim Ferriss podcast. I can't remember the guest, but it was, I think Tim Ferriss thing. And it was talking about, you know, the secret to productivity being this kind of batch approach where you batch everything. So I was very proud at the time that I would respond to emails super fast, but I was receiving, I think, 300 emails a day. So it was like half the time I'm on my phone whilst walking, responding to email. So I decided to start batching my emails as a test. So I split my day. I had to be responsive because I had a lot of people when they were waiting for things for me. So I put aside 30 minutes 4 times a day when I was just going to do email. And the first thing I noticed was in 10 minutes during each batch, I'd done them, because a lot of my emails were like, you do that, or like they copy me for no reason, delete, you know. So first off, I did the emails in 10 minutes. Secondly, because then I wasn't checking the emails for all the rest of the time. At the end of each day, I would have like 3 hours where I didn't have anything to do. So I would just go around and like find donuts that people had left in the office, or like, shout
Yeah, I mean,
shout inappropriate things at people, as you can imagine, and
what
stuff like
what
that.
else do you do with spare
Yeah, so I was
hours in
like,
a
this is
working
crazy.
day?
I was the busiest, insanest person in the world, and now I have 3 hours spare a day. Like, so obviously, the little time when I was on my computer and continually checking my emails and going back and going back and going back, all
Mhm.
those like, and I read about this afterwards. There's a period where you have to up to a task, do the task, and then up to the next task. When you add up all those task switching, it was
Mhm.
adding up to 3 hours. So that's
That's insane.
Yeah, so that's where I discovered that batching is the secret to productivity.
Yeah.
And I try and tell people this. I don't think they listen, and I don't listen half the time, because I'm still checking my email sometimes and stuff when I shouldn't be. But batching is the secret to productivity. So if you want to be significantly more productive, think about what you're doing. Is it what you should be doing? Write your list and then batch. Do not do anything else while you're doing it. And I mean, don't do anything else. I mean, don't check your phone. Don't look at the news. Don't look at your emails. Like, because sometimes I tell people to do this when I've been in offices with them, and then and they're like, yeah, I'm doing that. And then I watch what they're doing, and I'm like, you're not batching. You're on Facebook, like in the middle of a task. Like,
Right.
phone is very, very addictive. So like, put your phone, in a drawer or something for a minute, or wherever over the other side of the room. But I
Throw it
really
out the
think,
window,
yeah, it's just a
whatever you
waste of
need to
time. Yeah,
do.
delete social media from your phone. Like, it's a waste of time. That's a whole different topic. But yeah, it's because batching, and I just did this test, and I'm unbelievable results. And then from then on, I was like, batching's a secret to productivity. So it's like, it's like, I suppose, listening to podcasts and trying things out for yourself. Maybe that doesn't work for everyone, but for me, it's like incredible.
I think the key takeaway from this, though, is that it's such a seemingly small, right? It's such a small change to your workflow in just saying, I'm going to do this way, right? You changed one thing and you opened up 3 hours in your day. That's incredibly impactful when it comes to having a job where you're responsible for 400 people, or you're responsible for huge divisions that are doing massive scopes of work. Those 3 hours, obviously, you were using them to to find donuts and
Yeah, no, I mean, I do think it is a personality thing, because my daughter had this thing called a neuropsych, which is a 2-day test that they do for kids who are having, different challenges. And one of the things that came back on that was that her skill on multitasking was like very, very low. So probably
Mm.
genetically, she may have got that from me. So there probably is
Mhm.
other people who could maybe multitask more effectively. But neuropsych is an expensive test. If you've never had that when you were a kid, you won't know. But
Right.
if you are genetically predisposed to be very bad at multitasking, as I probably am, my daughter is, so I probably am, then you're going to see a massive impact from batching. But I
Yeah.
notice it just because people are often surprised about how much work I can get done. So I think, just compared to the people, I can get a lot of work done, partly because I'm batching,
Right.
and most people are not. So the
Yeah.
fact that everyone else is addicted to their phone and addicted to messaging and stuff is an advantage potentially for you, if you can put your phone in the drawer.
100%. And I think you hit on a really interesting point here, which is such a sort of symptom of, as you said, a really much larger conversation within the current day and age in which we live, where we are bombarded with stimuli constantly. We are receiving information nonstop. Our nervous systems are not really built to handle it. We're not really trained or taught how to build the strength of our nervous system to be able to receive that external pressure from all of the stimuli, which then leads to us thinking that we need to multitask all the time in order to get these tasks done, when really, if we can simplify and really focus, I think focus is such a key thing that I would highlight for any professional, any entrepreneur, any person. Being able to focus is one of the best skills that you will ever develop, because it actually allows you to deliver that work, to think clearly, to do the work that you need to do, and be able to feel much more satisfied at the end of it, because you don't feel like you're context switching, across the different tabs that are either physically open or are open within your own brain. And
Yeah, I
kind of
think
to
just
that
just
point.
going back to what we talked about at the start, right, about things that are kind of stupid, right? if I said, oh, there's this guy called Mark and he's invented this invention, right? He puts this thing in your ear and it basically triggers off your dopamine receptor, and you'll feel kind of good um, in the moment sometimes, but over time you'll get quite depressed. Mark's going to make billions of dollars. You're going to make nothing, but you will waste like 3 or 4 hours of your day. Do you want to sign up for this product? You'd be like,
is Mark Zucker? Is this Mark Zuckerberg?
you said that. You said that. Cut that out. Cut that out. It's like, that's mad. That's madness. But that is what everyone's doing.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And, I think again, we're in this pursuit for dopamine. So it's how can we get that dopamine in a way that's also more sustainable, right? So, when you're talking about what you do, your ritual that you have discovered works for you, where you're getting that dopamine from ticking off your to-do list and feeling that you have completed a full day, that you've done it to the fullest of your ability, that you feel, good about what you do every day, you're getting that dopamine hit in a way that's less temporal, that's more sustainable. And also that's obviously pushing the ball down the field, which is something that you also said that I want to highlight, which is, I feel that people, particularly in business, often feel that they have to be all or nothing, or that they have to do things overnight, that things need to be 0 to 100%, right? Whereas I think this mindset of just 1% better every day, if you just think about it in that way.
It's partly because I've been lucky to sell a company, right? And I ran that
Yes.
company for 13 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I had a lot of pain at different points along the way, and the ball went down the field and back to the starting line, down the field and back to the starting line. So, but I've got the perspective that in the end, I sold the company, and that's a big part of that is luck. But I think having that perspective is very helpful. So then when I do have a bad day or a good day, I'm just like, my job is to move the ball down the field. It goes down the field, it goes back a bit, it goes down the field, it goes back a bit. But you have the perspective that if you keep making good decisions, those decisions will compound to being something good. Maybe not in a straight line, and it will be painful along the way, and it might take, probably will take way longer than you would like it to. But it's just about doing the best you can every day with, making the best decisions that you can, the most thoughtful decisions that you can each day.
Right. And to your point, it's that compounded or cumulative effect. It's like going to the gym. You can't go to the gym once and all of a sudden be shredded. I mean, no, you can't. I was trying to think of an opportunity where you could, but muscle takes time to build, and toning takes time to build, and these things that we're working on, they take time to build, and they take that constant effort. It's little by little every day, and it's that commitment to that discipline. So actually on this point too, with discipline, I wanted to ask from the perspective of entrepreneurship, what is your relationship to discipline? How do you make sure that you're balancing discipline and ensuring that it doesn't move into rigidity? What does that look like for you within the context of business and professional life, as well as personal life?
Well, I suppose first thing is habits, right? Habits is a automatic response. So it stops the having to, should I do this, shouldn't I do this thing. So I would really recommend reading Power of Habit and Atomic Habits, which is like a follow-on to Power of Habit, written by different authors, because I think it's very powerful to create these like things that you just do on routine, because then you're like creating this compounding effect. So that's the first thing. There's a lot of tricks that are in those books, so for example, sometimes I don't want to do things like anyone else and I'd rather watch YouTube videos, but I'll be like, okay, if I do these things, then I'll let myself watch a YouTube video. So it's like I set the reward of the thing that I want after the things that I don't really want to do.
Right.
I always do the hardest, or try to always do the hardest task first. So like you do the hardest stuff first, so you're over the hill from the start of the day, kind of thing. A lot of people, that's working out. I prefer to work out a little bit later because I want to spend my like highest energy doing my work. But a lot of people work out first. They've done a hard thing, or like ice bath. They've done a hard thing. They've set themselves this thing straight away. I also have this little expression, which I think I read in the David Goggins book, which is discipline is what you do. So sometimes when I don't want to do something, I just say to myself, discipline is what you do. So, the guys in the trench, in the war, right, in First World War, the guys who were crying in the trench and the guys who went over the top, they felt the same. But
Right.
the guys who went over the top just were like, discipline is what you do, right? So you can be scared, but you can still go over the top.
Right.
I would have been crying in the trench, but that's a whole different thing. But it's like, you can feel a certain way, but it's
Right.
how you act that matters. So
Yes.
you can say, I don't feel like doing this. I don't, like whatever, but you do it. But I think, the main thing with discipline is it's hard if you're having to make a decision. So you want to make it like a habit, removing bad habits, creating more good habits. And I would say that that builds this kind of consistency, which builds this compounding, which, it still won't give you returns, financial or otherwise, in a straight line, but will way more likely give you returns. So I'd say that is the main technique, is to think about your habits.
Yeah, 100%. And another question I wanted to ask, just going back on something that you had talked about within the context of talent, but also something that I think is important to talk about within the context of business and life as a whole, is this idea of pot fillers and pot drillers, right? So this idea of energy givers and energy takers. And I'm wondering how, as an entrepreneur, you stay sane, as someone with 4 children, as someone with an amazing wife, a partnership to manage, a parenthood sort of journey to manage, as well as a business. How do you maintain balance between work and life? How do you maintain your own mental health and sanity? How do you do it?
Okay, well, I mean, there's a lot to it, I suppose. I mean, I am very lucky that I married an amazing woman. And if you're not married yet, I would really recommend thinking about your partner very carefully. And do they balance you out? And are they going to become like Mr. or Mrs. Crazy as soon as you marry them? I know that's hard to know, but if you don't know, wait a bit longer, because it's she is such a support for me with the kids, and I'm sort of prioritized in terms of what I need. So that's, first off, very lucky there. I've also done quite a lot of work on myself. So I have a therapist that I have every week, which is, quite expensive. But to me, it's your only experience is through your own brain. And a lot of people seem to think of therapy as I'll do a bit of therapy for a few weeks. And then they're like, oh, I'm done. I've solved that problem. I think that's madness. If your only experience is through your own brain, you should be spending a reasonable amount investing in the maintenance of that, which is having somebody really good, a foil that you can talk to and can give you advice. And obviously, there's a lot of rubbish therapists out there, but if you find a good one, I really think it's worth investing in that as a regular thing. For those who watch, Billions, they have that woman who they all go to, it's that type of performance coach, it can be performance coach, a therapist. I meditate usually twice a day. So in the morning, I do 20 minutes when I wake up, which I do lying in bed, which you're not supposed to do, but it's more like a clearance of the mind. I just listen to the sounds in the room and that kind of thing. And then I often do it in the evening. I've been testing this new LED bed, and in the afternoon, after I finish work about 3, I do 20 minutes again. I find the days I do both, I really feel much better, happier. I journal every morning, which involves just getting my thoughts down on paper. I don't think anyone will be, unlike Marcus Aurelius, I don't think anyone will be reading my journal in a few thousand years, because it is absolute load of trash, the same weird anxieties I have every day, or what I've eaten and stuff like that. But it's just getting my thoughts down. I try and write my intention down. I often write what I'm grateful for, which generally is my wife and my kids and my health and stuff, the same sort of stuff, but just a reminder of what I'm grateful for. So I get that sort of journaling piece down. I exercise 4 or 5 times a week. Not naturally athletic, but I also have, since I moved to Los Angeles, have 5 or 6 really good friends that I spend some time with, and I think having that sort of sense of community really helps. And I suppose I'm just trying to be honest. A lot of people in America, I find, are they want to tell you everything's awesome all the time, especially business people. And that's just a lie. Even everyone's having problems and stresses and stuff. So I just try and be open about this is going well and this isn't going well, especially with
Yeah.
Lauren, my wife, but also with my friends. And still get triggered by things that happen. And, then I will try and manage them, with my therapist or different techniques, CBT, cognitive behavioral techniques that he's taught me. So definitely still have struggles with it. But I think, there's this Naval Ravikant thing he says, which is to try and run your mind in debug mode, which is where you're having your crazy thoughts, but you've got this other little mind, which is observing the crazy,
Mm-hmm.
going like, why am I being crazy right now? What is these feelings? So sort of
Mm-hmm.
like investigating feelings that you're having. Where are you feeling them physically in your body? A lot of the time you'll have that anxiety will actually come out in your body. So making sure, tense and release your muscles,
Mm.
like different techniques like that, which can help you navigate emotions. Emotions are very powerful signals from your subconscious, but there
Mhm.
is also a lot of noise in there from your past and traumas that you've had. So it's just helping you navigate the signal and the noise, which is what therapy can help with. So yeah, it's a lot of factors, but I do cut out people who I think are more of a negative influence in my life, and I think sometimes that can be like a little bit harsh if it's like that person just needs help and that's why they're behaving that way.
Mm.
But if someone is not improving my experience on average,
Mhm.
um, if I'll try and help people where I can, but I think like if they're not improving my experience on average, then I will just stop hanging around with them because I want to be happy and then help make my wife and kids happy. And so it's like, I will cut out people regardless of some people I've known a long time who I just don't think are a positive influence in my life.
Right.
It's a mixture of things, obviously, not perfect, but definitely made a lot of progress. I think also maybe just getting a bit older. I think in your
Mhm.
20s and stuff, you're still working out who you are. It's like when you're in relationship drama, it's always a bit more stressful, that's sort of triggering, I think. So like having being, in a stable sort of marriage and stuff is like, for me has been stabilizing, definitely. And I'm definitely way happier in my 40s than I was for sure in my 20s. So it's been a good journey, but it's been hard work, and I've spent, on therapy, I've spent a lot of money because
Yeah.
I regard that as I think that's another a thing that people don't do. They think of it like, as I said, like as they have a few sessions and stop. Like I don't think
Mm.
unless I can't really afford it, I would just never stop.
Right. Well, I think the thing is with therapy is that it's something, again, not to use the same metaphor that I've already used in this episode, but it is something like you don't go to the gym for 3 sessions with a personal trainer and then say, I'm done. I'm good. I don't need to work out anymore, right? Because we're taught, from an early age how to take care of our bodies. We're taught how to brush our teeth, how to wash ourselves, but we are not really taught hugely how to take care of our minds, which is shocking. And definitely we're seeing some movement in this, as time goes on, but it is something where that's how we are operating in the world. That's how we're relating to other people. It's how we are building our relationships. It's how we communicate. It is everything about our relationship with the world. And so the fact that a lot of us don't know how to take care of ourselves in that way, it's something that needs to be prioritized and seen as something that has a huge amount of value. So I think, to your point about this maintenance of balance and sanity coming from really seeing where you see value in your life and seeing value with family, with friends, with people that really give you that energy, and kind of releasing things that are taking away energy, or that you feel not so nice after you're interacting with certain people or doing certain activities. I think that taking that inventory is just such an important thing, especially when you're someone who just has a very full life. You want to make space in your life for more of that fullness and that opportunity.
Yep, definitely.
So, before we cap off, I just wanted to ask if there was anything else that you wanted to share, anything else that you would give as advice to either established entrepreneurs who are well in their careers, or those that are just starting out, or even professionals that are kind of thinking about what that big leap might look like for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to give generic advice because everyone's situation is different. But if, as I
Mhm.
said, if anyone wants to talk to me, we can put maybe my contact details in the show notes, or like I don't really use social media that much, but I have started using LinkedIn again. So if you search on Simon Mansell or Artemis, you can probably find me and just put a note. So, I'm happy to connect with you. Like, I'm happy to give anyone like individual advice. But I suppose my just general advice would be to try and learn as much as you can, um, and take calculated risks, right? Like think about your downside, worst case scenario. Um, but I think, fortune does favor the brave. So
Mm.
taking some risk, you only need to hit one business really to be very successful. So do it thoughtfully,
Mhm.
develop skills, making sure you've got some money saved in case you need to pay the bills and that kind of stuff. But I would say, yeah, try and learn as much as you can and take some calculated risks.
Sounds great. So I have one more question for you. We asked you last episode what beauty means to you, but normally we will ask our guests of what wellness means to them as well. So I would love to know from you what wellness means to you personally.
Okay, that's an interesting question. I would say that wellness means to me probably eating, sleeping, and movement mainly. So eating most of the time the natural foods, whole foods. Trying to move a little bit every day. I try and work out 4 or 5 times a week, and then I need quite a lot of sleep. So trying to get ideally 8 hours a night doesn't always happen, but trying to get 8 hours a night of sleep. They're the main things, and then I think there's some other things that you can do, like treatments, which are sort of accelerants, which can be like things, catalysts, things you add on top of those basics. To me, like they're the basic things. If you're not doing them, you should do them first. But if you are doing them, treatments, like like for example, some of the like lymphatic drainage type
Mhm.
massages, for example, can really help like remove the toxins. I do sauna usually a few times a week. um I was doing ice bath as well, but I haven't done that recently because I was going somewhere to do that with some friends. But I think some of those things, going outside and getting some sunshine, light therapy, or those things are good additives. um, and then I also think the mental wellness is really important because your brain is your experience. So the meditation that I do and the journaling that I do and the therapy that I do regard as part of wellness, because there's no point being physically well if you're not mentally well.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much again for joining us for another episode. We hope to see you back for a future episode. And thank you so much for everything you shared.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Glow and Tell. Please like, subscribe, comment, and follow anywhere where you listen to podcasts. We'll see you next time.